My parents forced me to babysit my sister's kid every weekend for free. So I moved out and let them handle their golden child alone. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and I've always tried to be the responsible one in my family. Growing up, my parents had this strict way of running the house. Everything had a schedule. Every decision felt like a test, and every mistake was magnified. My younger sister Emily was the complete opposite, charming, persuasive, and somehow the golden child in their eyes. No matter what she did, she was praised. No matter what I accomplished, it never seemed enough. From a young age, I learned that responsibility wasn't just expected, it was demanded of me. I quietly accepted it, thinking that keeping the peace and helping out was just what being part of a family meant. Weekends were always the hardest, while my friends were going out, catching up on sleep or binge-watching shows. I was stuck helping around the house, running errands, or taking care of Emily's little kid. Max was adorable, don't get me wrong. Bright eyes. Laugh that could melt anyone, but he was also exhausting. 1 minute tantrums, the next demanding attention, constantly needing someone to referee his moods, and that someone was me. My parents, without fail, found ways to guilt-trip me into it. He needs you. Sweetie, you're the only one who can handle him, or Emily can't do this alone. It's too much for her. I'd nod, plaster on a smile, and swallow my irritation. I told myself I was doing the right thing. Family came first, didn't it? But over time, the frustration began to simmer under the surface. Week after week, it was the same routine. Me sacrificing my free time, my sleep, my social life, while my parents and sister got to glide through their weekends uninterrupted. I loved my nephew, I loved my family, but the constant one-sided expectations started to weigh on me. Every time I glanced at my phone, hoping for a moment to breathe, I felt the invisible chains of responsibility tighten, and yet kept going because that's what the responsible one did. But somewhere deep down, a question started gnawing at me. How long could I keep doing this before it finally broke me? The weekends never seemed to end. Every Friday evening, like clockwork, my parents would call with a reminder, or more accurately, a command disguised as a request. Max will be over tonight. UL watch him, 1TU? Emily has plans, and we can't leave him alone. I'd force a smile, shove my fatigue down, and agree. Even though I had been looking forward to unwinding after a grueling work week, the truth was, it had become a ritual I dreaded. Long hours filled with endless questions. Snack demands, tantrums over toys, and cleaning up the same messes again and again. Max was full of energy, the kind of boundless, relentless energy that could drain even the most patient person in under an hour. I loved him, but loving him didn't make the responsibility any less suffocating. By the time Emily's friends arrived for her brunches or movie nights, I'd be exhausted trying to keep Max entertained while hiding my irritation. My parents would casually drop by, peeking in to make sure everything was running smoothly, their subtle judgment pressing down like a weight on my shoulders. "You're so lucky we have you," they'd say, smiling as if I was being rewarded rather than used. Sometimes I'd catch Emily sneaking out the door, whispering a thanks, "Bro," that felt empty and fleeting. She had mastered the art of effortless charm, and the adults always fell for it. Meanwhile, I was stuck in the background, invisible, the one whose efforts went unnoticed. I began noticing the small things that hurt, the way my parents never asked about my week, the way my sister treated her kids' needs as paramount while mine were irrelevant. By the end of the night, I'd slump onto the couch feeling drained and bitter. The apartment smelled faintly of spilled juice and leftover snacks. Max was asleep finally, and the quiet was almost too much to bear. I'd stare at the ceiling, realizing how much of my life had been consumed by everyone else's demands, and wonder when nor if my own needs would ever matter. And then, inevitably, Friday would roll around again, and the cycle would begin. I couldn't shake the thought lingering in my mind. Maybe there had to be a limit to how much one person could give without anything in return. It wasn't just the weekends that got to me. Anymore, it was the way my entire life had become, structured around other people's convenience. I worked a full-time job, putting in long hours just to afford my own space someday. But every time Friday rolled around, that freedom evaporated. Even when I tried to plan something small for myself, a dinner with friends, a short hike, or just a quiet night binge-watching a show, had to be postponed or canceled. "Max needs you," my parents would say, or Emily would text, "Can you please watch him?" "I've got a thing," I'd sigh, knowing there was no arguing, no compromise. I loved my nephew, yes, but the constant pressure was slowly suffocating me. I began noticing the unfair patterns more clearly. My parents, who always stressed responsibility, never acknowledged the effort I put in. The smallest inconvenience on my part would trigger sighs. Disappointed looks or passive-aggressive comments, "You could try harder." You know? Meanwhile, Emily's tiny mistakes were brushed off or laughed away. It was exhausting and infuriating, but I still carried on, convincing myself that family came first and that this was what loyalty looked like. One evening, Max had a meltdown over a spilled cup of juice, and I ended up cleaning the sticky mess while my parents casually complained about my lack of patience. Emily strolled in later, acting oblivious, her hair perfectly styled, her smile effortless, and I felt a tight knot of anger in my chest. It wasn't just the work hit, it was the lack of recognition, the constant comparison, the expectation that I was disposable while everyone else's needs came first. Even my own friends started noticing. They'd ask why I was always unavailable on weekends, and when I explained, the sympathy was there. But it couldn't undo the feeling of being trapped. I'd lie awake at night, hearing Max's laughter echo in my mind and my parents' voices in the background. And a quiet resentment began to form, gnawing at me from the inside. By the time Sunday evening rolled around, I was physically drained and emotionally depleted, staring at the clock, wondering why I was the only one sacrificing so much. And somewhere deep down, a dangerous thought started creeping in. What if I just stopped being the one everyone relied on? By the time I reached my mid-20s, the weekend grind had become unbearable. And yet I still went along with it out of a sense of duty. Every Friday, I could feel the tension coil in my stomach as my phone buzzed with another reminder from my parents. "Max will be over tonight. Don't forget." Even when I had planned something as small as a quiet night alone or catching up on sleep, they never seemed to matter. The guilt-laden calls, the subtle disappointment in their voices, made saying no almost impossible. I tried convincing myself I was doing the right thing, that this was what family meant. But the weight of obligation was slowly crushing me. Max's energy had only increased with age. He was now 4, and while his laughter could light up a room, his constant need for attention left me drained and irritable. He would throw tantrums over the tiniest things, a misplaced toy, a juice spill, or not getting the cookie he wanted immediately. And I was always the one who had to calm him down. Meanwhile, my sister strolled through her weekends carefree. Her social life untouched, her responsibilities conveniently light. My parents never acknowledged my exhaustion, instead offering small compliments that felt hollow. "We appreciate you," they'd say, their words ringing empty against the backdrop of relentless demands. One Saturday, I had been up since 6, juggling a crying Max, spilled cereal, in the chaos of a messy living room, when my mom leaned against the doorway and sighed dramatically. "You really need to try harder," she muttered, as if my efforts weren't already at their limit. Emily, oblivious as always, chimed in. "Thanks for doing this again, bro. You're the best." Her words, meant to be sweet, only felt like salt on a wound, acknowledgement without respect, gratitude without fairness. As I sat there, cleaning up another disaster, I felt a creeping realization. This wasn't just exhausting, it was unfair. The imbalance, the constant expectation that I put everyone else first, was slowly eroding my patience, my happiness, and even my sense of self-worth. And for the first time, I wondered if it was really worth it to keep giving. When no one seemed to notice or care? Asterisk, and as I glanced at the clock, counting down the hours until Sunday night, a small but dangerous thought planted itself in my mind. Maybe there had to be a breaking point. That Friday, something inside me shifted. I had spent the entire week grinding at work, barely catching sleep, only to come home and be handed Max for the weekend, like clockwork. Usually, I'd swallow my frustration, put on a smile, and get through it. But this time, I felt a spark of rebellion. I tried to hint gently that I needed a break. "Hey, maybe Emily can take him this weekend. I've got some things I need to catch up on." The response was immediate, predictable, and infuriating. My mom's voice took on that sharp, disappointed tone I knew too well. "You're the only one we can rely on. You know that. Don't you want to help your family?" My dad chimed in with a softer, but equally manipulative, "We're just asking. Is that so hard?" And then Emily, as if reading the tension perfectly, added her sugary line. "Please. I really have this thing, and you're always so great with him." For a moment, I froze. The familiar guilt crept in, the one that had kept me compliant for years. But then I realized something crucial. I had been enabling this cycle for far too long. Week after week, month after month, I had put my life on hold, sacrificing sleep, social time, and my mental health, all to uphold an illusion of responsibility that no one truly appreciated. And I had let it happen quietly, tolerating subtle insults and backhanded compliments, believing that being the dutiful one was somehow noble. That night, after Max finally fell asleep, I sat on the couch, staring at the ceiling. I could hear my own heart beat over the soft hum of the apartment, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel anger, not the quiet. Simmering, kind, but real, sharp, almost frightening anger. I realized I didn't owe this constant sacrifice to anyone, not to my sister, not to my parents, not even to my nephew. And as I glanced at the clock, knowing Sunday night would soon roll around and the cycle would repeat, a thought took root that I hadn't dared consider before. What if I just stopped? What if I finally set a boundary and put myself first, no matter the fallout? The following weekend, I decided to test the waters. I told my parents straight up that I couldn't watch Max that Friday. My voice wavered slightly at first, the guilt gnawing at me, but I held firm. "I've had a really exhausting week," I said. "I need a break. Emily will have to manage this one herself." My mom's reaction was immediate, a sharp intake of breath, followed by the faintest tremor of anger in her voice. "You know how important this is?" she said, trying to layer obligation and disappointment into a single sentence. Emily texted me almost immediately. The little emoji-laden message dripping with feigned innocence. "Please, can you just do it this one time? I really can't. You're so good with him." I read it, closed my eyes, and let out a slow breath. Something had changed in Emma. I wasn't going to respond to manipulation the way I always had. For once, I refused to apologize or justify myself. Friday evening came, and I stayed home, finally free to watch a movie I'd been meaning to see, cook a proper meal for myself, and just breathe. Meanwhile, my parents scrambled, attempting to organize Emily and figure out who would watch Max. From the corner of my window, I saw the chaos unfold. Emily was stressed, pacing back and forth, her voice raised, pleading with my mom. It was the first time I saw her, and even my parents, struggle without me silently taking over. I couldn't help a small, almost guilty, sense of satisfaction. This was what independence felt like: frightening, exhilarating, and empowering all at once. I could still hear Max in the background, fussing and crying, and it was a little heartbreaking. But the realization hit me. My absence was forcing the family to face the very reality they had always shielded themselves from that night. As I sank into my bed, the quiet apartment around me, I felt a mix of fear and liberation. I was testing boundaries for the first time, but I knew the storm that was coming wouldn't be easy to navigate. And deep down, I couldn't shake the thought lingering at the back of my mind. Once I start standing up for myself, there's no turning back. Saturday morning hit like a punch to the gut. I woke up to a flurry of missed calls, frantic texts, and the unmistakable tension in my parents' voices. Max is crying non-stop, and Emily can't handle him. My mom barked over the phone. My dad chimed in, trying to sound calm but failing. "You can't just abandon him like this. He's family." For a moment, I felt a pang of guilt, the old familiar guilt that had kept me trapped for years. But then I remembered every Friday I had sacrificed, every plea ignored, every sigh disguised as encouragement. By mid-afternoon, Emily had thrown her hands up in exasperation. "I can't do this. He won't listen, and no one else is helping me." Her voice carried through the phone, a mixture of frustration and panic. And I couldn't suppress the bitter satisfaction that maybe, finally, she was facing consequences for relying on me so heavily. My parents were trying to mediate, but it was chaotic meals forgotten. Toys scattered across the living room, Max screaming every few minutes. The chaos was almost cinematic, and I couldn't help but feel detached. Observing from my small apartment as they struggled to manage what had always been my burden. Still, seeing them flounder didn't erase the nagging loneliness that crept in. Part of me missed the routine, the sense of being needed, even if it had been toxic. I felt isolated, a rock-bottom kind of solitude, where I realized how much of my life had been built around pleasing them, and how little I had truly lived for myself. My emotions churned, relief, guilt, anger, and a strange exhilaration all at once. That evening, after a string of frantic calls and messages, I finally put my phone down and exhaled, feeling raw and unsteady. For the first time in years, I felt completely untethered from the expectations that had defined me. But even as the quiet settled around me, I couldn't shake the question that lingered. Prickling at the edges of my thoughts, had I finally crossed a line that could never be undone? By the next week, I knew it was time to take the leap I'd been thinking about for months. I had been saving, planning, and mentally preparing myself to move out and claim my independence. Every day, the thought of finally having a space that was mine alone, free from constant demands, filled me with a mix of excitement and fear. I began making lists, budgeting carefully, and researching apartments close to work so that weekends could finally belong to me, not to Max, Emily, or my parents. I told myself it wasn't about abandoning my family. It was about surviving and reclaiming the parts of my life that had been stolen. I packed boxes quietly at night, moving slowly so that no one would notice, savoring each small step toward freedom. I even made arrangements for furniture and utilities, imagining what it would feel like to walk into a space that smelled like nothing but me, my coffee, and my life on my terms. The anticipation was electric, but also nervous. I worried about the confrontation that would inevitably come. About my parents' manipulation, Emily's guilt-tripping, and the judgment I would face. Still, every time I thought about the endless weekends of exhaustion and the way my sacrifices had been dismissed for so long, my resolve hardened. I realized that I couldn't keep living in their cycle of expectation and resentment. On the evening I finalized the move, I felt a strange combination of relief and fear. The boxes were stacked neatly, the plan set. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to feel the thrill of possibility. I knew the upcoming weekend would mark the first test of my independence, and I couldn't help but smile as I imagined my parents finally having to face the reality of managing Emily's kid on their own. As I sat on the floor amidst half-packed boxes, a quiet thought whispered in my mind, "There's no going back now. Once I step out the door, the life I've known, the one where I'm endlessly responsible for everyone else, will be left behind. And I won't be looking back." Move-out day arrived with a mix of adrenaline and apprehension I hadn't felt in years. I woke up early, my heart racing as I double-checked the boxes, my apartment lease, and every little detail I'd planned. Outside, the streets were quiet, almost mocking in their normalcy, while inside, felt like I was stepping into a completely new life. Every item I packed felt like a symbol of independence. My books, my clothes, even my coffee maker. For once, I was doing something purely for myself. My parents didn't notice at first. I could see the subtle panic in their faces when they realized I wasn't around to manage Max. But I didn't stop to witness it fully. Emily, of course, tried to guilt-trip me one last time. "You can't just leave me like this. You know how hard it is without you?" Her voice carried the old charm she'd always used to get her way. But this time, I didn't flinch. "I've been doing this for years," I replied quietly but firmly. "It's time I take care of myself." The drive to my new apartment was surreal. The city felt different somehow, the air fresher, the space around me lighter. I could hear the hum of the engine, the distant chatter of morning traffic, and I realized I hadn't felt this calm in years. For For the first time, I could breathe without guilt pressing on my chest by the evening. I had set up my small living space lights arranged just the way I liked. Music playing softly in the background, a cup of coffee steaming on the counter. I felt a mix of relief, exhilaration, and oddly fear. I knew my parents and sister were struggling back at home, scrambling to manage Max and face the reality of a weekend without me, as I sank into the couch. Stretching my legs and finally tasting freedom, a quiet smile crept across my face. This was only the beginning, and yet I already felt the thrill of autonomy. But even with the peace surrounding me, a small, lingering thought whispered, "They're going to realize just how much they depended on me, and I can't wait to watch that unfold." The first weekend fully on my own was liberating. I woke up late for the first time in years, the sun streaming through my window without a single worry about Max or Emily's plans. I made a proper breakfast, brewed coffee without interruptions, just sat on the balcony, listening to the city hum around me. For the first time in as long as I could remember, the world felt like it belonged to me, even if only for a few hours. Meanwhile, back at my parents' house, chaos had officially set in. I could hear snippets from texts and calls Emily sent, the desperation practically leaking through the screen. "I can't handle him. He won't listen. Someone has to come." My parents were frazzled too, trying to feed, entertain, and calm Max while juggling their own expectations. I could almost picture the scene, the spilled cereal, the scattered toys, the crying, and the mounting stress. It was the first time they were experiencing the reality of their golden child's needs without me quietly stepping in to fix everything, and honestly, it felt good. I won't lie. Part of me relished watching them flounder. Not out of cruelty, but because, for years, I had carried this weight silently while they remained blissfully ignorant of my sacrifices. Now the roles had shifted. For once, the parents and the golden child were forced to confront the chaos that had always existed around me. I spent the weekend doing the things I'd missed for years, catching up on shows, cooking meals without interruptions, and even reading in peace. Each moment reminded me that independence wasn't just a luxury, it was a necessity. I'd been denied for far too long. Yet even in my newfound freedom, a small pang of guilt crept in. I thought of Max and wondered if I was being selfish. But the stronger voice in my head reminded me I'd given enough. I'd sacrificed enough. And as I sipped my coffee, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I couldn't help but smile at the thought simmering quietly inside me. They finally had to face reality. And there was nothing I could or would do to fix it this time. By Monday evening, the inevitable confrontation arrived. My parents called, their voices tense, carrying that familiar mixture of disappointment and frustration that had haunted me for years. "We need to talk," my mom began, and I could already sense the manipulation creeping in. "You can't just abandon your responsibilities. Max needs you, Emily needs you. We thought you understood, family." My dad added his guilt-laden tone. "You've always been the one we could rely on. Why are you choosing yourself over family?" I took a deep breath and, for the first time, spoke my truth without softening it. I've been doing this for years. Every weekend, every holiday, every time there was a need, I've been there, and no one ever stopped to consider what I wanted or how exhausted I was. I'm not saying I don't care about Max or Emily, but I can't keep sacrificing my life and my sanity while being treated like this is expected. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, the kind that made me realize they weren't used to hearing me speak like this. My mom's voice wavered, betraying a hint of shame. "But we thought you were happy helping. You never said anything." Emily, of course, tried to interject with her practiced sweetness. "I just thought you liked it." "It's fine, don't be upset." I ignored her and continued firmly, outlining the years of one-sided expectations. The manipulation, the constant comparisons, and the emotional labor I had carried alone by the time I hung up. There was silence on my end, a quiet weight lifting off my chest. I felt exhausted but empowered, like I had finally set boundaries that couldn't be ignored or guilted away. For the first time, I realized that standing up for myself didn't make me selfish, it made me human. And even as I sat back on my couch, Letting the adrenaline subside, I knew the family dynamics would shift forever. They would have to reckon with my absence, with the reality I had forced them to face. But one thought lingered in my mind, soft but steady. I had finally reclaimed my voice, and there was no turning back. Weeks passed, and life in my new apartment settled into a rhythm I hadn't known I was capable of. Mornings no longer began with the groan of exhaustion or the dread of another weekend of babysitting. I cooked my own meals, set my own schedule, and spent hours simply enjoying the silence or diving into hobbies I'd neglected for years. Each day, I felt my energy return, my patience rebuild, and my sense of self once buried under relentless demands finally bloom. Back at my parents' house, I could see the subtle changes unfolding from afar. Emily struggled to manage Max without my constant intervention, and my parents were forced to reckon with their own inability to handle the responsibilities they had always deferred to me. I could almost hear the frustration in their voices during phone calls, the hurried tone of panic when Max's needs became too much for them to manage alone. It was satisfying in a quiet, almost guilty way. But I reminded myself it wasn't revenge. It was justice through reality. Over time, I noticed shifts in our family dynamic. I was no longer the default solution for every problem. My boundaries became respected, or at least reluctantly acknowledged, and even Emily started to adapt, learning to handle small responsibilities without constant reliance on me. I still loved my nephew, but I could engage with him on my own terms. Without the weight of obligation pressing down, sitting in my apartment one evening, sipping a cup of coffee and listening to the soft hum of life outside, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of liberation. I had taken control of my life, stood up for myself, and reclaimed time and energy that had been stolen for years. I realized that empowerment didn't come from pleasing others. It came from honoring your own needs and refusing to be exploited. And as I looked around my quiet, personal sanctuary, a warm sense of satisfaction settled over me. I had faced years of manipulation, exhaustion, and guilt had come out the other side whole, strong and unapologetically free. For the first time, I felt truly at peace, knowing that I had finally chosen myself and that my life, my weekends, and my happiness were no longer anyone else's responsibility.